it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making chocolate sugar cookies. Okay, this is the chocolate version of my classic sugar cookie recipe. That recipe goes insane every year around this time. It's a very great, solid sugar cookie recipe. I love it. If you've tried it, I hope you love it too. So I wanted to share a chocolate version. It's not always as easy as just adding cocoa powder, so I made the necessary changes. So if you're looking for a chocolate version, here you go. Okay, comes together very quickly. Start with a large mixing bowl, and we are going to add 1 cup or 226 grams of softened unsalted butter. We're also going to be using a cup of granulated sugar. And for today's recipe, you could absolutely use a stand mixer, but today I'm just going to be using an electric hand mixer. And we're going to cream together the butter and sugar until they are creamy and slightly light and fluffy and well combined. Next, we're going to add 1 large egg. I'm just trying to pick out a good one here. I think I talked about this before, but my chickens don't always lay consistent sized eggs. So when we're testing recipes, we actually do weigh the eggs to make sure we're using standard large eggs. That being said, most of these recipes will work with extra large or even small eggs. I know that from experience, but I always recommend large. So we'll add our egg. We're also going to add some vanilla extract. You want 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, which is half a tablespoon, one little heavy there. And we are going to mix everything together. It's always a good idea to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl to make sure things are well combined, because I don't know if you got a peek of that there, but it wasn't totally well combined. And especially when you're using a stand mixer, sometimes ingredients like to settle in that little ridge or that little indent at the bottom. So always scrape your bowl. All right. Looking good there. Set that aside. Grab a separate bowl for your dry ingredients. So here I have 2 cups plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. It's 265 grams. I'm also going to be adding cocoa powder. So this is half a cup or 50 grams of cocoa powder. Now, I really recommend a Dutch cocoa powder. It has a much better flavor with these cookies. Natural cocoa powder does work. The flavor's just honestly not as good. We're also going to add a half teaspoon of baking powder and 3/4 teaspoon of table salt. Go ahead and whisk everything together. Get that nicely combined. Oops. Try not to get it all over your counter. Glass bowl makes it easy to see if you got everything mixed well, and I did not. Let's go ahead and bring back our wet ingredients, and we're going to gradually stir the dry ingredients into the wet until it's completely combined. Okay, I do want to talk briefly about this dough and the fact that it needs to chill. So I have found sometimes this dough can chill for as little as 1 hour, and you could be fine to roll it out and cut it, no problem. However, that's gonna depend on a lot of factors, like your kitchen temperature, how soft your butter was, exactly how cold your fridge is, and how often you open the door. So to be safe, I recommend chilling the dough for at least 3 hours or even overnight. I did experiment with different recipes, including like a no chill version, and honestly, you're gonna get the best flavor this way. In order to get a no-chill dough, you have to add more of the dry ingredients or reduce some of the wet ingredients, and you just don't get as good of a flavor. So I really felt that the chilling time was worth it to get the best possible chocolate sugar cookie you could. Scrape in the bowl again, pretty good shape. Do one more quick stir. So this dough is going to need to chill, as we just discussed, and I'm going to divide it into 2 discs. I prefer to do this because then I can work with one at a time, and while I'm working with one, the other half is staying cold in the fridge instead of getting too warm and more prone to spreading. And you don't have to divide it exactly. Just better to work with 2 parts than 1. And the thinner you spread it, the faster it will chill and be ready to cut out. So if you're really in a time crunch and trying to make that 1 hour happen, use butter that's just slightly cool still, and make sure you make your cookie dough disc nice and thin. Just use my hands to form it into a disc, and then we'll go ahead and flatten it. This is going to go in the fridge. You can see I did not divide that very well at all. But again, to be safe, you want to let it chill for 3 hours. My butter was a little softer than I like, so this is definitely gonna take 3 hours. All right, I have some dough that has been chilling overnight. One thing about dough that is chilled longer than 3 hours, or even sometimes if you pull it out at 3 hours, sometimes it can be a little bit too firm, and you'll want to let it sit at room temperature, if I can get into this, for like 10 minutes before you begin. It shouldn't be cracking when you're rolling it out. So we're going to lightly flour our surface, and I know I'm going to get some comments from people saying, why don't you use cocoa powder because you are using, a cocoa powder dough. I don't like to. For one thing, it's way messier to use cocoa powder, but also cocoa powder is more drying than flour. So if you're using cocoa powder, your cookies are going to be more dry, counter is going to be way messier, and cocoa powder is more expensive than flour. So I use flour. And as I am rolling this out, I'm periodically going to just scrape underneath of it and add more flour just to keep it from sticking to the countertop. So we're going to roll this dough to be between 1/8 and 1/4 inch thick. I have found that the thinner you roll it, the more defined the edges are. Once I go above 1/4 inch, the edges don't stay quite as sharp as they bake. That would be a pretty thick cookie, so I think that's totally fine to recommend keeping it below 1/4 inch. Let's go ahead and scrape this up a little bit thinner. So if you have any flour that's like sticking on top of your dough, I'll add a little bit more for illustrative purposes. Just use a pastry brush and pretend you're like an archaeologist and just brush it off. If you are baking with your kids, this is a fun thing that they can do in addition to cutting out the shapes. Then we'll go ahead and we'll cut out our shapes. I'm just using stars, and I'm going to transfer these to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And look at that, I got a little bit of flour on it. We'll just brush that off too. And anytime you're making a sugar cookie dough, try to keep your cuts as close together as possible so you get as many cookies as you can out of a single roll. Because obviously we're going to regroup these scraps and re-roll them out because we don't waste cookie dough. But the more times you roll it out, the more funky they can look as they bake and the more dry they will be, just because you're working more and more flour into the dough every time. So I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but your oven should be preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. A cookie of like this size is going to, and this thickness between 1/8 and 1/4 inch, is going to need to bake for about 8 to 10 minutes. If you're making smaller cookies, obviously reduce the time. If you're doing larger cookies, you might need a little bit more time. Since they're chocolate cookies, it can be a little bit hard to tell when they are finished baking, just because, you know, you can't look for the edges to be golden brown or anything like that. A good idea would be just to bake a couple or bake a tray of them, let them cool, and then make sure you're satisfied with how done they are. An overbaked cookie is just the worst because they're too dry. You want them to be soft and stay soft for days. Now I'm going to be showing you how to make a chocolate icing, a sugar cookie icing, but another thing that you can do is you can take a little bit of sanding sugar. I don't want to touch that because my hands are dirty, but I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that sanding sugar on the cookies before we bake a few of them too. I actually really like doing that. It's a lazy way to decorate your cookies, but it's really good. And it's just much easier than making that icing. Not that the icing's difficult. Like growing up, my mom did not make sugar cookie icing. We just put sprinkles on the cookies. And since they're chocolate cookies, colored sprinkles don't always look as good, so the clear ones work nicely. Got this little clear sanding sugar, and we'll just do a couple cookies this way. Adds nice texture and a little bit of sweetness. All right, these go in the center rack of our oven. I'm gonna check them at 8 minutes, and then we'll let them cool before we decorate them. But in the meantime, I will show you how to make that frosting. All right, so you don't really want to make this frosting, or icing is what it really is, until the cookies have cooled completely, because if you put it on a warm cookie, first the cookie could break while you're handling it warm, but also it would melt the glaze or the icing, so it would become a glaze. So wait for your cookies to cool, and then you're going to need 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. We're going to add a tablespoon of cocoa powder. The icing's a little bit more forgiving. I use Dutch cocoa powder here because this is what I used in the cookies, but natural cocoa powder does actually work fine for the frosting. And I'm just gonna whisk these together a little bit. It's not gonna be perfect, but I wanna get them combining. And then I have 2 tablespoons of milk measured out. I'm not gonna add all of it just yet. I'm going to add a little more than a tablespoon about, and I'm going to add a tablespoon of corn syrup. This is light corn syrup, not to be confused with high fructose corn syrup. I like to use this because it helps the frosting or the icing to set nice and firm and shiny, gives it a really nice texture. If you don't want to use it, you can leave it out. You'll probably need slightly more milk, but I really do like to use it. I use it in my easy sugar cookie frosting as well, the non-chocolate version. We're also going to add just a little bit of vanilla extract, just a 1/4 teaspoon. And we'll whisk this together, get everything combined. And we'll add more milk as we need until we get to the right consistency, which of course I'll show you what that looks like. And this icing is really foolproof because if it's too thick, you're just going to add a little bit more milk. If it's too thin, you are just going to add a bit more powdered sugar. Looks like I might actually need the full 2 tablespoons today, we'll see. So the consistency you're looking for, when you lift your whisk out of the mixture, it should ribbon off of it, and the ribbon that forms should hold its shape for several seconds before dissolving back into the mixture. If it dissolves right away, it's just too thin and you're not going to be able to do any kind of nice outline. This could actually use slightly more. Okay, I'm really happy with that. So Our cookies should have come out of the oven at this point, and they should be completely cooled, which mine are. Let me grab them. Here are my nicely cooled cookies. You can see the ones that have the sugar on them. Not as impressive as colored sugar on a regular sugar cookie, but they taste delicious. Let me grab some wax paper because this icing is going to drip, so we just want to make sure any messes are caught. Makes for a much easier cleanup. Now I'm going to pipe this frosting. It's very pipeable. I have a piping bag fitted with, this is a 4 or a 5 tip. 4 tip. 4 is a little bit finer. Should do a little more detail. And if you make the frosting or the icing and your cookies have not cooled completely, you can just put a piece of plastic wrap directly on top of this icing and it'll keep it from hardening before your cookies have cooled and before you can decorate them. Let's go ahead, decorate some cookies. Oh, and you can use, for working out any bubbles, they do sell these like decorating tools. I cannot remember what they're called right now, but I just like to use a toothpick. Scribing tools, I think they're called. Let me go ahead and I'm shaking a little bit because I'm nervous in front of you guys. To make it easier on yourself, you could thin out some of the icing and use the thicker stuff for outlining and the thinner stuff for flooding or filling. I'm just using the same icing for both. But you could divide the icing in two, add a little bit extra milk to one, and then it will spread a lot more easily. Won't dry as fast though. I just use this to fill up those gaps. I do have a sugar cookie frosting video I shared. I think I shared it last year or the year before, where I talk in more detail about getting different consistencies with your icing and different things that you can do with it. So if you're looking for more information on that, check it out there. And that's how you make chocolate sugar cookies with chocolate icing. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you try it, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I really do always love hearing from you. Stay tuned. I have a lot more cookie recipes coming this season. I think you're going to love them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. All right, just to be clear with you, your icing usually needs to sit for like an hour before it's firm, but they still taste good if the icing's not hard yet. It's really good. Next, I didn't drop anything, Colt. Number 1 taste tester here. So we are going to, my gosh, okay. Oops, pretend that didn't happen.